Hello and welcome to the fifth Optimal Live talk. We're doing coming to you live from the Center for Optimal Living in New York City. I'm here with one of my teammates at the center, Dr. Adam Frankel. And our topic today is finding how to find your path to optimal drinking. And we thought that it was a particularly timely topic to talk about, because we're in the midst of the holidays when there's lots of drinking, lots of challenging situations, lots of wonderful things coming up, but also can be very stressful for people, and drinking can be sort of a tricky part of life to navigate. And so we thought we would share with you some ideas that we've been working with here at the center. Adam and I have in particular been doing a lot of brainstorming lately about, what are the elements that go into developing your optimal relationship to alcohol, your optimal pattern of drinking. And so we thought that we would share a number of the things that we've been thinking about and working with here with you. You can, if you are watching this live, you can type questions in and we will try to answer them and respond and kind of hope that we can have a dialogue. We'd also love to hear from some of you about the things that you found useful to develop your optimal relationship to drinking. So I might, Adam, ask you to, if you would, to talk a little bit about sort of the framework that we work with here at the center, and that kind of infuses our thinking about kind of making positive change in our lives and developing ideal, healthy relationships to potentially risky behaviors. We're organized around what we call integrative harm reduction therapy, or integrative harm reduction ideas can be applied to self-change processes. And it's based on a kind of model for understanding human behavior that we call psychobiosocial multiple meanings. Kind of a big word that attempts to capture the idea that there are many factors, biology, psychology, social factors, relationship factors, that are always interacting in really alive, dynamic ways, in ways that are unique for each of us, that contribute to our behavior. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about that you'd like to share. Just kind of, what is the integrative harm reduction framework in essence?
Yeah, I sort of, as Andrew said, I like to think about that framework having to do with factors in various areas of our lives related to biological factors, psychological factors, social factors, cultural factors, habit factors, routine factors,
Political
factors, and us to get curious about those different potential driving forces and how they interrelate, as a kind of an opening frame and step to both identifying how we may want to go about making positive change, opening up a space towards kind of identifying a roadmap, something that we think about at the center together, kind of assessing where we are and where we want to go, and those acting as a beginning place for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Thank you. So when we think about optimal drinking, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, how you think about what is optimal drinking. What does that concept refer to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such an important question, because I think it really highlights the idea of orienting us to what is it that we want? How is the path that we want to go and walk? So when I think of optimal, a few things at least begin to come to my mind. One having to do with, what am I hoping to get out of this experience in the choice to drink, if I do choose to drink. So this idea of thinking about the function and kind of it orienting us to a roadmap, as it were, and thinking then about what might be some of those things I want. So if if Andrew and I are going to a gathering together in a week, and a choice is made whether or not to engage in, let's say, alcohol use, a first question I might ask myself is, what am I hoping to get out of the experience at the party? Am I looking to connect more deeply with others? Am I hoping to have fun? Am I wanting to identify some social anxiety or other feeling states I may manage? And so I guess when I think of optimal, I think of first orienting to the function of how I'm setting up what I'm hoping to get out of it. And then to me, that second question about what would be the markers of boundaries or risks that I wouldn't want to cross, and that I would want to make sure that I don't step into in some way. So I think of optimal almost as a frame of both the area that I want to walk as well as those areas I don't want to cross over.
You know, as you're talking, what it makes me think about is one of the things that I think is fundamental to our philosophy about making positive change in our lives, which is you're talking so much about what do I want, what's important to me, you know, what do I value, you know, what kind of relationship do I want to have to this substance or this activity. And I think that that's key to empowering ourselves, empowering one another, to kind of get in the driver's seat of our relationship to risky behaviors. And maybe that begins to morph into sort of one of the first sort of setting the stage ideas that we wanted to talk about, which is cultivating an attitude that's conducive to positive change, that's conducive to optimal drinking. You know, that then enables us to do all of these other things that kind of factor into creating, you know, finding the path and creating that optimal drinking plan. So what are your thoughts about that attitude that's conducive to change, and why it's so important, maybe as a first issue to focus on?
Yeah, I think what Andrew's saying is so important. And in my mind, the idea of our attitude opens up a sense of us being able to make choices that are both in line with what is it that we want, as well as being able to open up a non-reactive space. Kind of the attitude I see as opening up, moving from an energy that may move reactively into one that opens up the choosing part of ourselves, and which I think allows us to engage more safely and meaningfully with substance or other choices we may have. And I think, as Andrew's highlighting for us, like this notion of attitude being a central driver of our choosing a path, and choosing a way in which we want to walk. And I think at least one of the ways that I think about our work is to really help facilitate identifying a path that is meaningful, and engaged in positive change.
So you're also talking about finding your path, as opposed to someone else's path, which maybe goes back to what, I touched on at the beginning, that, we think that each of us has a highly unique relationship to our behaviors, to substances, to ourselves. And the path really ideally, should reflect who we are as unique humans with unique needs, vulnerabilities, challenges, strengths, resources, etc. So it's possible that we could walk somebody else's path for a while and kind of surrender to that, and that could be very useful. But it seems that ultimately we need to find a path that we can fully embrace. And just to, say something that I think is important to note, when we think about the ideal path or to optimal drinking, that's going to reflect who we are uniquely as humans, and that could ultimately be safer, recreational, controlled, moderate, and it could be a choice to abstain from alcohol. The question is, how do we get, so one of the questions we're grappling with is, how do we get from where we are to that optimal place? What's a process that can help us get there? So having an attitude or a perspective that's conducive, I think is really a key. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what are some of the qualities of that attitude. And maybe in particular, considering that there's so much conflict and negativity and some stigma and associated with alcohol and substance use, and many people who struggle with their relationships with alcohol and other substances often feel kind of contaminated by shame and guilt and anxiety and self-attack. And I think that all of that might be, it's related to our attitudes in our culture. It may also be related to things that we've done when we've been intoxicated, or sort of the symbolic meaning that the substance reflects, that I want to care for myself and I don't know how. But it seems to me that all of those attitudes, negative attitudes and feelings, can often get in the way of being able to do what you were talking about, creating a kind of a space to reflect about what's important to me, and then to begin to think about making better choices, working toward the changes that we want to make. But so what are your thoughts about kind of some of these attitudes or these qualities that go into that attitude?
Yeah, I see one quality that could be useful, entailing the idea of a non-attacking or non-judgmental space when it comes to opening up or allowing us to frame that attitude. That often that sense of judgment over past choices, impulses, desires we may have can act as a potential force away from positioning us into that attitude and the choices we may want to make at our center. Yeah.
So non-judgmental, non-attacking. That sounds like, if we flip it, you're talking about something like self-compassion, kindness toward oneself, acceptance, self-acceptance.
Yeah.
Curiosity. What about curiosity?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this notion, or to invite us to be as open as we can related to our thoughts, our feelings, our body sensations, our desires for substance or other things. Um, as we imagine, as we can experience those things in a way with curiosity, meaning to have an idea of slightly removed from the experience itself, so that we can look at it potentially in a new way. Um, those are
Yeah. In psychotherapy, there was a really influential person, Harry Stack Sullivan, who coined the phrase participant observer. He talked about the therapist as being a participant observer in the therapeutic process. We're involved, engaged, and participating in the process with our clients, but we're also observing. And I think more recently in the field, we've come to believe that both the therapist and the client are both participants and observers. And in fact, there's another guy who talks about creating an alliance around compassionate curiosity, so that we can work together as a therapeutic team, client, therapist, being kind of in alliance, connected around being curious together about everything that's happening. And it occurs to me as you're talking that you seem to be describing like an attitude like that with ourselves, being kind of participant in our lives, we're actively engaged, but also being this kind of curious, aware, non-judgmental, self-accepting observer, being in our lives and also kind of reflecting and observing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it actually, Andrew, it makes me think of I guess perhaps for some who may be watching or listening, this potential additional piece when we open up that attitude, and if we open up that compassionate, accepting, curious place, often I find it may lead us to multiple wants, or the idea of, I'm noticing I want this, and I'm noticing I want that. And I'm curious how you think about that, and when that kind of attitude opens up a space of multiple desires that may be in conflict with one another.
Well, I think that is absolutely fundamental to finding your path to optimal drinking. But also I think it's fundamental to creating an optimal life in a more general sense, because I think that we humans are filled with competing wishes, needs, impulses, aspirations. A guy named Hal Stone said that, we live in polarities. The part of me is ambitious, and a part of me doesn't really care about success. Part of me wants to work hard, and a part of me is like the laziest person on the planet at times. We love our interpersonal connections, and we need them, but at times we hate them. They are fraught, they are anxiety provoking, they're stressful. At the party we want to get loose, we want to get loaded, we want to feel relaxed, we want to celebrate and feel free. on the other hand, we don't want to make a fool of ourselves. We don't want to overdrink and regret it. We don't want to wake up drunk, hungover, with bruises. So I think that honoring and respecting that we all have this kind of multiplicitous self, that we're not one self. We are not a unitary, automaton or trying to become that. That contributes to splits in the self. I'm just the good guy. I'm not, the bad guy. And yet that bad part of me, the selfish part of me, might go underground and then actually come out and catch me unaware in having that third or fourth or sixth drink that I told myself I didn't want to have. So actually, if we don't own all of and acknowledge, which I think is a life's work, but to kind of discover more and more and more of these aspects of ourselves, if we, are not on the alert for that, these parts of us, these energies, these needs, these feelings can go underground and can get expressed in excessive, addictive, problematic behaviors that then are in conflict with the other parts of us. But if we can acknowledge and own that we have all of these competing parts, altruism and selfishness, we can then think about how to balance, how to have them temper one another, how to express them in more integrated ways, to be selfish and altruistic, to be in my relationships for myself and my own needs, but with a regard for the needs of the other. Don't know if that's exactly what you were getting at. We call that here in our work embracing ambivalence. It occurred to me not too long ago that we humans are ambivalent about every important choice that we have to make. We're ambivalent about change. We are comfortable in our behaviors, in our habits, in our current relationships, in our current life, even while we may be uncomfortable and as we're growing, increasingly feeling like we need to make a change. But we need to kind of really open a space to examine all of the aspects of that ambivalence, to then begin to think about new solutions rather than being at war with our ambivalent parts.
And that, what Andrew was saying, really strikes me, because in some way it begins to orient us to beginning with this attitude, moving from that attitude into getting curious about potential multiple desires or things we may want, which then may open us into thinking about strategies and systems about how might I go about getting those different needs or wants met from those modes.
I'm aware, since we don't have that much time left, we've been talking in a more kind of global way about, and I think, in a very deep way, it seems, about this sort of setting the stage with this cultivating this attitude conducive to change. I wonder if we can focus in on, in a more concrete way, on some of the strategies, tips, suggestions that people can begin working on immediately, and that in a later, maybe our next Optimal Live talk, we'll come back to really focusing in more depth on the skills and the strategies. But for example, I think to make it more concrete, when we think about optimal drinking, we can consider what are the qualitative aspects, that is, you had alluded to this. What do we hope to gain? What are the positive things that we want to get from drinking? Qualitatively, what are the risks that we want to avoid? But then we can think in a very systematic, strategic way about how does the pattern of drinking then need to shift in order to kind of accomplish those give us those qualities in terms of measuring drinks, counting drinks, pacing drinks, understanding something about the relationship between the amount and pacing of drinking and blood alcohol level. Being able to kind of self-monitor as you're attempting to put, an ideal drinking plan into place. Developing your skills at self-monitoring through charting your drinking, tracking your drinking, even evaluating how you were feeling before when you made the decision to drink. How did it work out? So you can evaluate it from the standpoint of when is it working for you and when is it working against you, which then can lead to a consideration of fine-tuning your plan, making positive change goals. Maybe, Adam, you can talk a little bit about something that you've done a lot of work with, which is learning mindfulness skills, which then can be used both to assess, to track, to monitor, and then to bring into kind of an implementation of the ideal drinking plan.
Mm-hmm. And I think that point is so useful, which is this practice and this skill training of awareness training, non-reactivity training, allowing us to more fully implement and develop the host of skills, as Andrew spoke about, to help us step into our intentions related to our optimal drinking plans. So what it may, in a very concrete way, may look like at the party in the next few weeks or in a moment of challenge is that can we even take 10 to 15 seconds to settle into, whether it be our breath, noticing what's unfolding for us, to center towards what our plan was. Often in those moments, it's hard to remember. There are many factors that lead us to away from what our plan may be. But one of these skills practice, mindfulness being one, to try to help us stay in line with the strategies and systems that we may be having, or we want to put forward, as Andrew said. And so I think of it as a meta skill towards us implementing these other more concrete skills related to tracking, pacing, food and water, perhaps taking a break completely, or all of the other unique, individualized skills we would want for ourselves. Yeah.
So imagine that you've really thought through how you ideally want alcohol in your life in terms of the qualitative issues, what you'd like to get from it, the risks you'd like to avoid, what that would look like in a very concrete, strategic way in terms of pacing, counting the number of drinks, evaluating in an ongoing way. That some people find that it is very useful even to write down the drinking plan. Sometimes we call it a game plan. When a sports team goes into a game, they're prepared with a game plan. Yeah. It's not a guarantee of success, but you've thought through what your intentions are, what you hope to achieve, how you want to end the party feeling, strategically how you're going to work toward that. You may want to anticipate challenges and come up with strategies for meeting those challenges. We have this idea of a positive change motivation list. Come up with 10 good reasons to stick to your plan. You might also write that down. so that as you're in the party, you could pull it out and say, okay, here's my game plan. Here's my positive change motivation list. When I feel the impulse to throw the plan out, let me do what Adam suggested. Take 15 seconds, 5 seconds to breathe. Notice that urge. We call that urge surfing. So you can surf the urge, create a space to think, reflect on what was my plan and why did I decide to make it? Pull out your motivation list. And then have some skills and strategies that you can use to meet that urge and respond in a new way. Breathing, leaving the situation, finding a friend who's your moderation buddy or abstinence buddy, for that matter, if that's your goal. But so, and the other thing is that these plans are a work in progress. You come up with a plan, you experiment with it. Think of it as an experiment. Each time you implement the plan, you can learn something. What worked, what didn't work. You can go back then to the drawing board and fine-tune the plan so that you're continually working toward your vision of optimal drinking, trying to be really kind to yourself. And if you fail or to live up to your plan, see what you can learn from it so that it's a learning opportunity rather than a failure opportunity to kind of pound yourself into submission. So there's a lot we didn't get to talk about, but just in closing, any other useful tips, ideas you'd like to share at this point?
I think one potential thing to underline is the notion of small is often very meaningful. And when it comes to the change process, so 5 breaths, a phone call, some food, some water, although in the abstract, they can feel, I think for some, non-significant. I think one of the ways that I think we think about the work is that small positive change is meaningful and to be underlined. And these small systematic strategic things, both combined together as well as on their own, I think can be surprisingly useful as it relates to the change process. And just to encourage anyone who may be even having the thought, well, will this move the needle in a significant way towards what I really want? My experience is that it really can, especially over time. And for just to encourage the small in some way, I think of as the big. And no strategy is too small as a possibility of making change. That's just a thought that I had, yeah.
It's a great thought. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I really found this very enlightening and fun. I hope you folks find it useful. We would love, to hear your feedback. This video is going to be up on our Center for Optimal Living Facebook page, I think for eternity. So those of you that, visit us and watch the video at a later date, we would really invite you to share your feedback, your tips, your own strategies, things that you found useful with this community. And, we look forward to, our ongoing explorations with you in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Take care, folks. And if we don't see you before you get through all the holidays, we wish you wonderful, healthy, successful, meaningful holidays as you go through this next holiday season. Okay. Take care, everybody.